Thank you very much, Jay. Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming back in after break. Like Jay said, I'm Joe DeFrank, the weed scientist, Dr. Death, whatever they want to call me there at the UH. I don't kill everything. I can kill everything, but I try to do it selectively, so I just take out the ones I want. Just to give you a little background on my work at UH, I started in November of 1983, and much of my work at the early years was testing herbicides on vegetable crops, mostly leafy vegetables. I worked with dryland taro. We got Gold and Paraquat labeled on dryland taro. Did some work on wetland taro and Kauai. Worked on ornamental crops like proteas on Maui, potted orchids, anthuriums, and foliage plants in Hilo. And recently I've been working on establishing native Hawaiian plants on the roadways. I'm gonna talk about that. And what Jay was talking about earlier in the day about improving the landscapes. We're going to be talking about selective herbicides. In the past, I would think that most of your work was probably just kill everything, which is still going to be a major component. But if this movement to establish natives on the highways takes hold, then there are going to be a little bit more refined techniques for weed control, and I'm going to talk about that briefly today. All right, and so like Jay said, what we're going to do is I'm going to do this lecture section. We're going to look into a little bit of mathematics. I know that's a hot topic for a lot of people, but I want to try to simplify the math. And then we're going to go out and I'm going to do a calibration with the handgun, the orchard gun. Now, what's the spray technique that you guys are using mostly? Is it a spray gun or is it trucks? Spray gun. Backpack. You guys don't have the automated truck with it's injecting herbicides. Okay. What broke down? Yeah, that's on Maui. They go, oh, we don't do that. We just use the truck. I said, what happens when it breaks down? Oh, I don't know. Talk to the supervisor. Okay. Okay, so we're going to be doing that old school calibration, and I got some handouts for you. And of course, we have a little quiz. So, since we got a lot to do, we're going to get started here. First of all, what is a pesticide? Okay. All pesticides are considered poisons. They're used to sustain the landscape. Let me just see. Okay. It's like a little ghosting there. All pesticides are poison. It's just a matter of dose. Okay. Certain herbicides are selective, right? Like when we talk about Fusilade on zoysia grass. Fusilade is a grass that generally kills, is a herbicide that generally kills all the grasses. But at a low rate, it won't kill the zoysia and it'll take out certain grasses. So it's a matter of dose. So all pesticides are considered poisonous. A pesticide is any substance or mixture of substances that is intended for preventing, destroying, or repelling any pest. So at some point, you might want to have a chemical that is a growth regulator that just stunts things from growing, keeps it green, but keeps it short so you don't have to mow as much, okay? Labor saving. We're talking about safety on the highways. I would imagine you want to spend as little time on the highways as possible with the current news we've had, okay? So at some point, instead of killing everything where you have maybe a coarse grass, you might just want to suppress it. That would still be considered a pesticide because maybe not repelling pests, but a growth regulator is still regulated as a pesticide, okay? Misuse of herbicides can cause damage to desirable plants in the landscape or adjacent properties if drift occurs. You all know what physical drift is, when particles go flying away. There's also a concept called vapor drift. If you guys use Garland 4, okay? There's Garland 4 and there's Garland 3A, okay? What's the difference? One is called an ester, meaning that it has the ability to penetrate waxy cuticles better because of the structure of the molecule. The only problem is you could have a perfectly accurate application, no drift, and on a hot day like this where there's no wind, the vapors, as they evaporate, can come up and burn. We've done it ourselves up at our UH greenhouse property. We sprayed on a hot, still day like this, Garland 4, around the avocado tree. About 3 days later, you see fresh succulent stems on the avocado tree, 10, 12 feet high. They're all curling and burning, okay? No physical movement of spray, but vapor movement. So that's why we recommend now the Garland 3A. It's a salt. Salt isn't very volatile, but it doesn't have the ability to penetrate the waxy cuticles as well. So there's a trade-off. Better activity on waxy plants with the 4, but vapor drift. 3A doesn't have the vapor drift, but not quite as effective. So you can get damage with drift, or maybe with just vapor drift with the wrong chemical. See the types and targets in the manual. I think it's Appendix 10A and B. There's a pretty complete list of the herbicides and what they control. Okay, now what guidelines are used to determine when to use a herbicides? In landscaped areas, the manual indicates that they don't want to see weeds exceeding more than 10%. So I don't know how you judge that. Somebody's going to have to look at it and make a judgment there. Okay, so in landscape areas, in highly visible urban areas, which is most of what you have in this corridor here, not to exceed 2% in highly visible areas. Mowing every 2 weeks will help control weeds in turf grass. For example, that zoysia grass on that new Pearl City section, mowing will help keep most of the broadleaf weeds down. Grassy weeds won't be controlled that way. They'll just go, if they're weeds in turf, they just start growing the same level as the turf. So that's where more selective herbicides will come into play. Use appropriate pre-emergence or selective herbicides when necessary. So, like I said, it's my understanding majority of your work has involved killing everything and maybe leaving chemicals on the soil to keep weeds from popping up so fast. I'm going to talk about a situation where I'm getting involved with, I think, with these guys right over here, Paradise Landscaping. You guys, that's the area we're going to be working on next. So, now, the landscapers are going to install this land. So what's going to happen here, this is just west of the power plant out there and going out to Wyandotte, okay? And here's that little beach park right off to the side there. So there's a median strip there, about a half a mile, about a quarter acre of land. So the plan is, the contract is to take this weedy area, this rundown area. There's old Bermuda grass there. There's some other weeds growing in there. The plan is to clean this up with herbicides and then establish 3 native Hawaiian species. One is going to be called Mau-Aki-Aki. It's a little flat-growing sedge, looks a little bit like mondo grass. Nio, and then one other shrubby plant in the middle. So once that's established and the contractors leave, then there will be necessarily selective herbicides. For example, if this Bermuda grass starts to come back, you're going to have to use something like Fusilade, okay? Before the contractors leave, we're probably going to have to spray a grass and a broadleaf herbicide to kill any weeds during the establishment process. But this is going to be an important test area to see if we can actually make this work. Like I said, I've worked with that particular sedge. It's a little tiny speck of dust for a seed, so it's going to be slow to establish. It's not going to be like when you put down annual ryegrass and it pops up in 7 days and it looks real green. It's going to be much slower. Okay, these, of course, these native plants are not commercial. They're wild. They're never been domesticated. So establishing them and then being able to control weeds selectively is going to take some refined pesticide application and some accurate calibration. It can't be kill all in there, and you can't always do the hand weeding, because sometimes you pull out the weeds and you'll be pulling out the natives too. So this will be a good test spot for this new initiative with Hawaiian plants on the roadways, where herbicides will be required selective. Now, you go, why are they doing this? Across the country, not just in Hawaii, across the country, it's a well-established scientific concept that the transportation corridors, roads, railroads, what have you, that's the area that the invasive species travel, right? Because generally, you guys are trying to keep the weeds out, and then, when things break down, things wear out, it's an open space for weeds to encroach, and then they can move with water flow and so forth. So, to prevent the movement of invasive species all around, the idea is to have native species. So native species aren't invasive. They were there at the beginning. And so if they spread around, that's kind of what they want. Okay? And so the governor also is talking about, restoring the watersheds. Invasive species is a big topic. You guys are going to hear more about it. So part of this is making the roads not such a favorable environment for weeds, as well as trying to establish these native plants. So that's going to be something I'll be directly involved with this project, and you'll probably be hearing more about that in the future. So there will be this need for more complicated or more refined methods of weed control in these situations. Now, again, in landscape and urban areas, mowing these big weeds, like if you're in an urban, like I just saw guys mowing the median strips coming off of Kiam Highway down towards Leeward Community College. So mowing these overgrown conspicuous weeds is not an effective control measure in landscaped areas. So if it's landscaped and it's supposed to have a ground cover, Wadelia, mondo grass, or even a turf, if there's big weeds in there, just mowing them down is not the acceptable way. They want those to be removed. If they can't be pulled up by the roots, then careful spot spraying around them. So again, that area at Waianae would be an example. If we have the Mal Aki and the Nio and some other natives growing in here, and you're getting guinea grass or buffalo grass, just mowing it down to make it look like it's gone is not the required way. You would either have to remove it or spray it out with selective materials. So that's the situation with in urban areas and landscaped areas. Non-landscaped areas, like where you're going out up to Kauka Boulevard there, what's that, the H2? You got that steep bank. Well, that's a little bit different area. We'll talk about that, about how you control the weeds. Now, I want to talk briefly about the pesticide label. We heard earlier about the MSDS, which is the safety precautions, the toxicity, it's flammable, it's this and that, what happens when somebody gets poisoned. The other component is the actual pesticide label, okay? You probably have all read these. I just want to go briefly over what's on there. Of course, the active ingredient, this is Roundup Pro Max. So the active ingredient is glyphosate. So the active ingredient is the actual compound that causes the weeds to die. There's also other things on there. There's signal words about how dangerous it is, whether it's very highly toxic. Now, you might figure this highly toxic one, a few drops, they're probably just saying that. I can tell you for a fact that I personally have been poisoned by paraquat. I actually poisoned myself. I wasn't trying to kill myself. I mean, I was in graduate school where killing myself might have been, and I might have thought about it once or twice when things are looking kind of grim. But I was a graduate student, and the previous guy that had just left had garden plots that he was renting out to people. I mean, he was pretty industrious. And so I went to school at Michigan State, master's degree. Out of town a little bit was a farm that he had bought, I guess, I don't know. And they were renting out garden plots. Just like you have garden plots out here, these were commercial, where they would rent to people for garden plots. So I did that. You know, I tried to sell seed. You know, I'm trying to make some money. And I was growing eggplant for market. We had grown a couple different vegetables, but I was growing eggplant, and it was starting to get weedy. And you know, being I'm in a weed science program, and I got access to paraquat and sprayers. And of course, I didn't wear my mask this day, but I had a sprayer that had a shield on it. Okay, it was a sprayer, and it had like this plastic housing, so the spray wouldn't drift because I didn't want to get it on the eggplant. But somehow, you know, the wind comes up, and boom, I got a puff of that paraquat spray on my face. And I can actually taste it on my lips. It's a salty, bitter taste. And I think that's not too bad. And I keep working, you know, you keep working. But then I didn't feel anything for about 2 hours. I go home, have a bologna sandwich. Man, I threw that thing up in about 2 minutes. And then I tried calling the Poison Control Center. Yeah, I think I poisoned myself. Well, did you swallow it? Well, I don't think so. Well, it's not paraquat, and they hang up on you. So, yeah, when they say it's deadly, a few drops to a teaspoon, they're right. It is deadly. Generally, you won't be applying these, but these are accurate descriptions of the toxicity to people. Some of the other things that are important to look for on the label, they have things about storage. They have things about caution to animals. Now, you figure, everybody says Roundup is so safe. Why would there be caution to animals? Well, Roundup, the active ingredient years ago was, well, maybe it's still parts of the country, it was sold as Palato, a growth regulator, okay? And so what do you mean? You're spraying paraquat on mature sugarcane to increase the sugar levels. Well, how's that? The way paraquat works in the plant, it takes generally a sugar molecule is attaching to nitrogen to make proteins. Paraquat stops that. So if you're not making proteins, you're making sugar. So it was used as a sugarcane ripener. So let's say, for example, you're spraying in the countryside and there's weeds that maybe the horses or cows generally wouldn't eat because it maybe has irritation to it. You spray it with paraquat, or it's sour, like Gilo grass is actually called sour grass in some places. You spray it with Roundup, and at a low rate, if you don't kill it, the Roundup will start to make that grass sweeter. And the animals that normally wouldn't eat it will go eat it. And if it's toxic, if the grass or there's chemicals in the grass that were toxic to the animal, now they would eat the grass where they normally wouldn't. So that kind of thing is described on the label. It says, don't allow grazing animals near Roundup treated plants. That's the reason why. It actually literally makes it sweeter. If you do a low dose Roundup application on grasses, come back in about 2 weeks, you smell it. It'll actually smell a little sugary, like burnt caramel. Well, if they weren't eating it before the roundup, they shouldn't be eating it afterwards. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I wouldn't unless you know, you want to check and see if they can handle it. I would generally not recommend it. You know, if you got like a field and you say, man, those horses won't eat that stuff, I better spray with a little Roundup, see if they do eat it. Or I got some goats. I don't care about the goats. Maybe it'd be a good way to poison goats. You know, spray stuff that they don't normally eat, and then it makes it sweet and eats and kills the goats. But we don't want to talk about that. That's off-label use. Off-label use. Okay. All right. So the label contains more than just what the active ingredient is. Talks about the toxicity, talks about storage, talks about other little crazy things in the label. It's got a lot of different information on it, as well as personal protective equipment, what you're supposed to wear in terms of a mask, gloves, and so forth. Okay, so how to apply pesticides safely? First of all, you want to, like I said, you want to follow the instructions on the label. There's a lot of research that goes into that label. If you ever read the GOAL label, G-O-A-L, for dryland taro, I wrote that part of the label, okay, based on, you know, the Department of Ag didn't want it to be applied to wetland taro, so we had to write it so there was no way that you could legally do it on wetland, but it does work, but they didn't want it used that way. So people like me, researchers at universities, contribute to what actually goes into those labels. So they're actually, you know, supported by research data. Wearing your personal protective equipment as required on the label. You know, there's a certain level of safety for people who are mixers and handlers. Another one for people who are spraying. Generally, if you're handling concentrates, eye protection, as well as getting it directly on your clothes is probably more important. You're supposed to have fresh water during pesticide applications, either these OSHA standards or HIOSH standards. The idea is to have enough water in case you need to flush your eyes, but also when you take a break. You should be washing your hands so that if you smoke a cigarette or you eat food and you have your glove broke or something, you're not touching food or cigarettes and directly ingesting the pesticide. So for one applicator, 10 gallons. For two applicators, 20 gallons. I would imagine if you're applying pesticides, inspectors come along, they might want to make sure you have the water as well as fresh soap and paper towels so you can wipe your hands and dispose of it, okay? Be familiar with first aid procedures. This is another one where you read about first safety. I don't know if they're going to cover it, pesticide safety. But when people get poisoned by pesticides, there's things like, rapid, large amounts of saliva in the mouth, beady eyes, sweaty, you know, feeling faint. You may be able to recognize it in another person, but if you're actually suffering from a pesticide poisoning or something like heat exposure, you're kind of so low, you don't even know to stop. Same thing happened to me. I was up on Maui, 4,000 foot elevation, applying a fusilade to proteas. We're testing to see if the proteas can handle a grass herbicide. And I got my mask on, rubber boots, gloves, and I got my technician, Virginia Smith, was with me. So after about 2 applications of, you know, walking around at that elevation, I'm so out of it. And I'm going, I really feel kind of bad. And Virginia says, well, why don't we take a break? It hadn't even occurred to me to take a break. I just figured, man, I'm just feeling sick. I don't know what to do. Well, why don't we take a break? Oh yeah, let's take a break. So you may be familiar with, you know, the person's sick, get them to fresh air, take off their mask. But once you're the person who's sick, if you're by yourself, sometimes it just doesn't occur to you like, I better take off the mask and go take a break. You say, I'm feeling sick, man. You keep working because you're supposed to do it, but then you might pass out. So be familiar with these safety procedures, but it's, like I said, whenever I spray, I make sure somebody knows. I say, hey, I'm going to be spraying at such and such a place. Make sure somebody comes check on me. If I'm laying face down, you know, take the mask off and clean me up. Okay, so you know the guidelines for dealing with spills. Spills are another important component to deal with. I don't know if that gets covered as the lecture here, but spills, the amount of spill, what's spilled, there's certain protocols for when things get spilled in and around the highway. Okay, what are the basic types of herbicides? Okay, again, most of your work has probably been kill it all or put something like Sahara down. It kills the plant, leaves diorite on the ground, keeps the weeds growing for 3-4 months at a time. But we're going to be talking about selective materials as this movement towards, you know, landscape roadsides as well as natives on the roadways too. Okay, so let's just talk about the basic groups. You got pre-emergent versus post-emergent. Pre-emergent is something like Spectacle and Ronstar. Spectacle is and I'm going to talk about, there's been a name change. Spectacle is one of the new products that's listed on your label, okay? very effective compared to Ronstar. Both of these things will control weed seeds as they're germinating. Ronstar is a common ornamental herbicide that's used after the landscape. They sprinkle Ronstar. Spectacle is a herbicide that's generally used in turf. Okay, it's also, we want it to be used in the roadways because it lasts for months. About 6 months at a time at the labeled rate. So things shouldn't be growing unless there's a water washes it away. So, but the difference between Spectacle and Ronstar, Spectacle is active at about 10 times less the rate of active ingredient than Ronstar. So we'll be shifting into the Spectacle. So that's pre-emergent. It's applied to basically bare soil, and it keeps the weeds from growing. That's the ideal thing, bare soil. But a lot of times you're spraying a pre-emergence plus a post-emergence. So you're coating plants. There's pre-emergence there. It has to somehow get to the soil to be active. Like I said, that's the normal way that things are done. But ideally, to get the best effect, you would want to put pre-emergence directly to bare ground because that's where the seeds are going to germinate. That's where they're going to contact. When pre-emergence are applied to foliage, it has to somehow leach off, get to the soil to be effective. So it's not the best case scenario. Anyway, post-emergence. I talked about element 3A, and everybody knows about Roundup. Post-emergent means the thing has emerged. You got a growing plant, and you're going to spray that growing plant. Now, of course, the plant has to be actively growing. It's hard enough to kill perennials. It's impossible to kill them if they're drought stressed or they're growing in very compacted soil. So once things dry out, it doesn't make sense to spray weeds because generally you're not going to do anything to them. They're just going to sit there. Okay, so that's pre-emergence, post-emergence. Selective versus non-selective. Selective means I can spray out the grasses in my monograss. I can spray out the grasses in a hedge of hibiscus. Non-selective, like habitat, which is for aquatic use, is going to kill most everything. There's few things that it won't kill, but Roundup and habitat would be considered non-selective. I'm going to kill almost everything I spray. I coat it. Something like Fusilade DX is selective. Okay, only takes out the grasses. You're all familiar with 2,4-D, only takes out the grasses. Agent Orange, 2,4,5-T, mostly takes out only the broadleafs. That's why it was sprayed over jungles. It was mostly broadleaf plants. Okay, so selective versus non-selective. Now, just a brief word on aquatic uses. I don't know how much you guys ever have to spray ditches with flowing water or around estuaries or ponds and so forth. There's a new law that there was a court case that was settled in the mainland, which takes the control of pesticide applications out of the Department of Ag, puts it into the EPA Department of Health, and that's what happened with aquatic uses. So, from November 1st, 2011, all aquatic applications in the state are currently banned. That's because the court case happened. They have to make these new administrative rules, and so you can't spray aquatic uses right now. I don't know when those permits are going to come out, but that's what the word is right now. So, selective versus non-selective. Systemic versus non-systemic. The word systemic means it goes throughout your system. Okay? So Roundup is an example of systemic, means I sprayed half of the plant, but the whole plant died. Non-systemic means I sprayed half of the plant and just the half that I sprayed died. Okay? So systemic means it goes throughout the whole system, goes into the roots, it goes into the shoots. Non-systemic, like gramoxone, which is what paraquat I was talking about, gramoxone, and phenol. Phenol is actually a form of Roundup. Phenol is a thing called glufosinate. Roundup has the active ingredient glyphosate. What happens is this chemical turns into Roundup in the plant through metabolism. So the act of being absorbed and converted into Roundup doesn't make it translocate as far as the Roundup by itself. Phenol is more of an ornamental herbicide. It's for like edging the grass. If you want to edge the grass and not have it all wavy, you would use phenol because it wouldn't move that far into the plant. If you're trying to spray around plants and drift was an issue, like let's say you got young papayas, you want to spray down the weeds, but you worry that if you get a little bit on the plant, I'll kill the whole thing. Phenol also was sold in the Philippines and other places as basta, meaning stop. So it's like a non-systemic Roundup, or that's what it is, non-systemic, or a contact herbicide. When you spray something like diesel on weeds, you know, it kind of burns them up, but generally the grasses will grow back. That would be a non-systemic type of herbicide. Okay, so just a word about pre-emergence. Okay, it's applied to the soil, but like I said, many times you're mixing it together. There was pre-mixes called Sahara, was a mix of a systemic herbicide which was the active ingredient in arsenal, and diuron, which is the active ingredient in Direx, common sugarcane herbicide. But for the best effect, it should be paired to soil with as little debris on it as possible. Does not affect established and actively growing weeds. That's true to a certain extent. But Ronstar, which is a granular pre-emergent herbicide, does move into the soil a little bit. So if you put Ronstar into a bed of a perennial peanut, you're going to screw those peanuts up for about 3 weeks or 3 months. Because even though it's only designed to kill germinating weeds, it can leach into the soil, and some plants will be affected. So these aren't absolutes. Long residual remains active for several months. So if there's an area that's supposed to remain bare and you put down a pre-emergent, like if you put down Spectacle at the label rate, you're almost looking at a 6-month control period, okay? So if you know what the control period is for a pre-emergence, once you apply it, you should try to check on the calendar. We got to go back and put that down again if we want to keep it bare ground. It's generally applied as a liquid, which means you got to mix it up and spray it. There's also granules, which are ready to use materials. They look like sand. That's what Ronstar comes in 3 formulations: a granular, a wettable powder, and a soluble concentrate. 3 different forms. But the granular generally looks like sand, goes directly out, ready to use. I've seen some people make the mistake of putting granular Ronstar in water and go, hey, that stuff doesn't dissolve. It's like, yeah, man, it doesn't dissolve. It's supposed to be distributed that way, and then irrigation will move it from the granular pellet. Pre-emergence, post-emergence, kills existing weeds. The easiest time to kill weeds are when they're young. You probably all known that. Great big perennial weeds, there's a lot of plant. It's harder to kill. It's always best to kill weeds when they're young, okay? The best time to kill them is when they just germinate and they go from what's called the cotyledon leaf, which doesn't look like the real leaf, to the first true leaf, because it's going from stored food to photosynthesizing. That's the most susceptible stage to kill plants. Very effective against most herbaceous weedy species, must be actively growing. Like I said, right now it's been pretty dry, right? We had some rains there in around November, December. It was wet. Things are actively growing. That's why guys are doing all the mowing now, right? But things are starting to dry out, or they're kind of dry now. So once you see a plant starting to show drought stress, it's wilting, it's almost impossible to kill that plant with a systemic herbicide because it's not growing. It has to be actively growing for these post-emergents to be working. Most are liquid or applied and absorbed through the leaves. Some are, well, most are. Some can be actual dry flowables, which mean it looks like a granule, but it's actually pelletized, designed to dissolve in water. Some even come in water dissolvable bags, so you don't even have to weigh it. You just know how many bags go per unit area. The time needed for visible effects varies from several hours to 2 weeks. Mostly your contact sprays, the oil sprays, Gramoxone, it'll show up in about 2 hours. But Roundup, as you know, when it's applied at the right weight, takes about 2 weeks. Now, sometimes when you're mixing things, I know you guys were mixing Garlon and Roundup, 2%, 2%. And, maybe the next day, some of those broadleaf weeds are starting to turn up because 2% is pretty hot. What we found is that when we back off of the Garlon rate, we were spraying the 2%, 2%, and yeah, you get things die pretty good. Then one day we got down to the bottom of the Garlon bottle and we only had about 0.5% Garlon. Everything worked a lot better, okay? The reason why is that the Garlon was hot, was causing some injury to the plant immediately, and it prevents the systemic movement. But when you start to drop the rate, where you don't have immediate contact burn, it allows the plant to go deeper, chemical to go deeper into the plant. So when it comes to systemic herbicides, it's always better to go slower. It's like sex. It's better when you go slower. They say if you smoke after sex, you're doing it too fast. So remember that. With weeds, it's better to go slower. A little lag there, yeah. You're doing it too, I saw that on a t-shirt years ago. You're doing it too fast. Okay, now for woody species weed control is also considered post-emergence, okay? Now this is called the hack and squirt. That also could be taken 2 ways, but and then there's also this basal bark. So let's talk about woody plant weed control briefly. Okay, I don't know how much of your work involves getting rid of woody trees. Like if they're woody trees, they're going to be woody trees up on the H1 pretty soon, going up towards Costco. You see the Lucena coming, and up where they're not mowing it, it's starting to come up. So there's going to be some woody weed control up there pretty soon. So there might be some hacking and squirting going on up there. So hack and squirt generally means that you're going to take like a hatchet, make like a little dent into the bark between the heartwood and the outer bark, and fill that with a herbicide formulation. Again, these things are listed in your manual under woody weed control. There's also the use of a syringe. Okay, I was just down to State Surplus not too long ago. They had pallets of syringes for like $3 for 60 of them. So, you know, you can use them and throw them away. But anyway, that's another way to make an injection and inject the liquid. If you look at some of these forestry magazines, not like this one, Gempler's, but there's other catalogs that carry forestry supplies. There's also hatchets that you hook up with a hose. When you hatch it, it squirts the water into that hatchet thing. So it's all just one shot, okay? So these are called hack and squirt. There's also basil bark, okay? If you have I don't know how much guava is a problem around here. I know Big Island guava with the pigs is a lot worse on the roadways. Garlon as about a 3% solution. You can just spray Garlon on the base of guava stem. Kills it off real good. Okay, so that's basil bark, meaning the base and the bark, okay? Usually you're talking about 10, 12 inches when it says basil bark on the label. For large stumps, you can treat the edges. Why don't you want to treat the middle on a large stump? Because generally this is dead heartwood. The active growing layers are right around the edges, okay? The other one, if it's smaller ones where it's less heartwood, you can coat the whole thing. But a big stump like this, it doesn't make any sense to coat the middle because it's dead wood anyway. All right? There's also another option which we've sometimes done is to actually drill into the roots and put the Garlon in there and then cap it with a little caulking to keep it from being kicked back out by the plant. That's another effective way. A little slower because you got the squirt bottle, you got the drill, but it can be done, and the caulking. Okay, so just to review again, selective is designed to kill a target group of plants. We'll talk about the general group of targets. Generally, plant groups are grasses, sedges, and broadleaves. Okay, selective herbicides are safe and usually do not kill or harm non-target plants. Now, I says usually. Give you an example of where you can cause damage. Years ago, I had a complaint from the Big Island. There was grass growing on Bird of Paradise, and he had an outdoor Bird of Paradise plantation, okay? And the Bermuda grass was growing up on the Bird of Paradise. And Fusilade is labeled for Bird of Paradise. And so the guy had his workers spray it, but then, hey, the Bird of Paradise flowers are all screwed up now, okay? So what happened? The guy got the chemical down into the neck of the emerging flower, okay? And that's the most sensitive part of the tissue. So, and generally, you have to have a wetting agent with Fusilade. So when it says usually doesn't kill or harm, that's okay. But if you get that chemical down into, like, you know, you guys got the those bromeliads out there on the H1 they're talking about. If you get that chemical down into the bromeliad where it can sit in the neck, a chemical that may be safe around the edges of that plant, you get it down into the heart, well, then it's not going to be safe. So that's why they say usually, okay? For generally, with herbicides, you don't want to get even the selective chemicals stuck into sensitive growing tips of the plant, okay? Non-selective, again, kills most all the plants. No selectivity, meaning that most everything you spray is going to be killed. Great care with these. Commonly used as a spot treatment for weedy species. Drift onto non-target plants in windy weather is going to cause some problems. Okay, so just an example of selective versus non-selective. Man, the colors are kind of off. Anyway, what I'm trying to show here is that the sedges, this is in my yard, the sedges usually grow where it's too wet. So this is on the edge of my greenhouse, and where the water drains off of the roof, you have a sedge. Now, it's hard to, I can't really see the difference here, but this is trying to show that the sedge is yellow and the grass is green. I sprayed this with a chemical called Monument. Selectively takes out the sedge with basically no injury to the zoysia around it, okay? You guys are all familiar with non-selective use. Non-selective would be like a fence line here, where you're just going to kill off all these weedy species, and you want to leave it dead. So selective means I want to select one type of weed. Non-selective means I want to kill off all this rank growth here. Okay, systemic versus non-systemic. Again, systemic means that it's absorbed throughout the whole plant. Of course, for the plant to physically move it, it needs to be actively growing. It can't be stunted by lack of nutrients or water mostly. Effective on perennial weeds, slower than non-systemic. Like I said, slower is better. Sometimes even if Roundup, if you get it too concentrated, the chemical just burns the tissue because it's so concentrated, and it will reduce effectiveness. So if you've cranked up your Roundup rates to 2%, you might want to think about knocking them back if you think that you're not getting the same amount of control. We found that 1% is usually plenty. 0.5% of Garlon, 1% Roundup, because Garlon does have effect on grassy weeds. Very effective, more effective than the full 2% rates. Residual effects may be left on the soil. Garlon sprayed on the soil has about almost a 2-month residual. There can be some problems with it. We were using Garlon on Molokai at the Plant Material Center to grow the weeds and then spray them down because we wanted to get everything dead. And Roundup, doesn't work on certain broadleaves. But then what we found when we seeded it within a week or so, there was effects on germinating seeds. So some post-emergent herbicides, particularly Garlon and another chemical, Milestone, does have some soil effects. We got the, I'm going to talk about that. The question is, how do you know how much to put into the tank, basically? That's what I got this sheet here for. Chris asked me to work this up, so part of the calibration exercise is getting to use this sheet accurately, okay? Okay? So we're gonna be getting to that. Okay, non-systemic, again, it's also absorbed through the leaves, fast acting, only the parts that you spray die, you just get top kill, very little translocation, generally repeat applications are necessary when you use something like that. Okay, liquid formulations, everybody knows about liquid formulations, some are ready to use. There's a product called Pathfinder, okay? It's a combination of the Garlon product and another herbicide in an oil base, ready to go oil base. You wouldn't dilute that, you wouldn't put it in water, but it's a ready to use oil base. Now, it's kind of stinky because, I don't know if you guys know Kaipo Bernie, he's the equipment wrangler for the city and county parks and recreations there. I don't know why PO, he's hauling the equipment around. They did spray that stuff on some Lucena, some Hollycoa, and there was some complaints because the smell. So generally when you use those oil-based things, man, they're going to be kind of stinky. They're really designed to penetrate waxy cuticles and hard to penetrate surfaces. So liquid formulations there's ready-to-use ones. You see those at the store, ready-to-use Roundup. Most of the ones you guys are going to get are concentrates that need to be diluted. Okay. Most of the errors in herbicide application are generally made with the mixing. Too much or too little. So that's why we're going to do this calibration exercise to kind of simplify things and get you to physically put down 100 gallons per acre. Again, you want to follow label directions. The other main reason why you want to calibrate is, like the typo says, every time they go spray on the North Shore, somebody's videotaping them with a camera, okay? And then they file a complaint. And when they file a complaint with the DOA has to inspect. They have to come by and make sure you're applying accurately. So you want to be legal, of course, but to prove that you're legal means that you got to be able to calibrate. And if it says apply 1 quart per acre, you need to be able to show an inspector that, yeah, I did apply 1 quart per acre. And here's how I know how, because that's what we're going to do today, okay? We're going to try to show you how you would address a inspection from a pesticide inspector from the pesticide branch to show them that we are following the label because we followed what DeFrank said. This is what the amount per acre is, and we're doing it the right way. So that's at least you have to be able to be legal for sure. And as time goes by, there's going to be more and more of these sort of nuisance complaints. Okay, I talked about granules. Granules are like the ready-to-use Roundup. It's ready-to-use dry sand-type particles that go out. You can see where you're putting it. So sometimes people like that better. They can actually see the rate. You're usually gray or orange in its contrast with the soil. So there are ready-to-use granules. There's a bunch of different types. They need a precaution on the side of the road. If it hits the road, it can be swept away with water or wind. So generally, they're having a precaution in the manual about getting it too close to the roads because it's just going to sit there. And then it can be moved off and be a pollutant. Powders, you know what they are, wettable powders. They're concentrates. They're intended to be sprayed onto target areas. But they also come as wettable powders. They also come as what's called dry flowable. Okay, dry flowable, meaning it flows like a granule, but it's really designed to be dissolved in water. Now, the other thing is, I know when I first got here, people always wanted to, and I got a guy calling me up on the big island. I stopped talking to him. He's going, how many ounces are there in a can, a Vienna sausage can? Garrett, I swear, this just happened the other day. How many ounces are in a Vienna sausage can? It's like, you know, number one, they don't want you to use any kind of food container to measure pesticides. And number two, how the hell do I know how many ounces are in a Vienna sausage can? Now, I don't want to know how many ounces are in it. So, getting back to wettable powders, you may have at one time go, I weighed a scoop, and that scoop I know is 5 grams, and that's what I put into my backpack. If you have an inspector from the DOA, don't use physical dry measures. You have to weigh it out. That's a violation right there. You say, well, I know that this tablespoon per backpack is the right rate because I weighed it one time. Well, don't make sure that you weigh it. If the inspector says, I want to see you put it in there, weigh it out on a scale, okay? So dry materials by law need to be measured out on a scale, okay? So, all right. Hopefully you guys have scales. Okay, keep going here. We want to get to that lunch. Usually you can register pesticides for the state of Hawaii. Okay, everything that you guys are recommended are already registered for the use in the state of Hawaii. But you may hear of some new product and want to know if it's labeled or registered to be used. There's this website that's listed in your book that you can go there and determine if it's registered for sale in the state of Hawaii. Again, it's in your manual. You're only going to be using pesticides that have caution or warning signs. You're not going to be using the danger ones, okay? Restricted use pesticides. Now, restricted use pesticides, they're restricted for one of two reasons. Number one, they can be very toxic to the applicator. Number two, they can be very toxic to the environment, okay? So, regardless, restricted use pesticides may be purchased and used only by authorized applicators. Okay, now, somebody may say, like, okay, I'm the boss. I have a restricted use applicator's license. I'm supervising the crew. They can go out and apply a restricted use material. That's true because the law allows a supervisor to provide you with needs to provide you with written instructions on how to use that restricted material. And while you're making the application, that person needs to be able to be contacted, okay, by cell phone or by whatever. But it is possible for the supervisor to have the license and the actual applicator isn't licensed. So restricted materials can be applied by a non-licensed individual as long as the supervisor provides written protocol and is within contact during the application period. Okay, the other thing, just when you're looking at labels, of course, it should have non-crop, rights-of-way, roadsides for use in non-crop areas. There is a selected list for Hawaii. Now, many of the pesticides, of course, are going to be provided by the DOT, but there may be situations where you have to, maybe the supplier stopped making that formulation. Maybe it's no longer available, but there's another product, the same formulation, right? Element 3A is the same as Garlon 3. But if we have element 3A on the label, and you say, okay, they don't have any more element 3A at the one place we've been buying it, but they have Garlon 3 at the other place. Well, I guess you're going to need written approval. And here's a real-life example. This just happened the other day. Spectacle is on your label as a long-lasting pre-emergent herbicide. It's for turf and non-crop areas, primarily for turf. So since it has turf on it, golf courses, that product is pretty expensive because the company faces a lot of liability from golf course use. Well, they made this new product called Esplande. I don't know what the hell Esplande means. Why do you even have to have a word like that? I don't know. Why don't they just call it Givum or something? I don't know. I like Givum. Okay, now this one, Esplande, is the same active ingredient as Spectacle, okay? Same product. This one's a wettable powder. Why? Because wettable powders tend to burn less when they hit living tissue. This one is a liquid, soluble concentrate, okay? Because generally you're going to be spraying it on non-crop areas, so you don't care if you get a little burn. So this is the one that I actually want the DOT to use now, but it's not on the label. It's not in your book. They just changed this and had it registered, I don't know, about 3-4 weeks ago. So if you say, look, boss, Spectacle's on the label, but DeFranco says we should be using this. Plus, it's a liquid. I don't have to weigh it. And plus, I don't want to be cutting up those little bags and getting all that dust on me. So we want to use this. I guess you would have to get written permission to go out and get that because it's not specifically on this approved list. Okay? Esplande. Anybody know what that means? Any? I don't know. I don't know what it means. It means this particular herbicide now. It's the spectacle herbicide in liquid form, okay? So the engineers will theoretically be able to check on your applications by your pesticide use log, okay? So that's how they're going to police that business. Now, one thing that they don't want you to do is, like, you got like a big circular area or a turnaround or something, you would ideally like to just go hose that down with herbicide, kill it all off. All this grass that's growing, let's just kill it all off, man, because it's going to get dry. Nothing's going to grow till next winter. But this is called a blackout, and it's not an approved practice, and there will be severe penalties for this practice if they find out that occurred. So we don't want to be blacking out. Blacking out's okay for, you know, Friday, Saturday nights, but it's not good for working on the controlling weeds on the highway. Okay, so spraying versus mowing. What's that? Question? Somebody blacked out on me? No? Okay, mowing as a primary weed control is acceptable in areas maintained without formal landscaping, okay? So if it's not formal landscaping and it's this weedy guinea grass and buffalo grass, mowing would be okay if the material is there for vegetative cover for erosion control, okay? Or in very rural maintenance areas, okay? Not a whole lot of areas in Oahu are rural. It's people everywhere, but like I said, going out on H2, is it? H2, H1, I keep forgetting which one. Anyway, going up towards North Shore, you see those steep banks. They're not even mowing the hillside. They're just mowing about 6 feet up the hill. But that's where mowing a weedy species would be okay because it's there primarily for erosion control. Okay, other areas where you need to keep all the weeds down is the median strips, any cracks, expansion joints, pavements. They want that sprayed out all the time if it's a narrow one like that. Now, like I said, I guess you guys are all using the orchard gun system, but they got these other fancy machines, preferably at night or early morning. So you guys spray, anybody spray at night? Night vision goggles, night stalkers, posing this stuff down at night? I would prefer to do that if I could. You know, it's like, hey, you know, I got some night vision on and I'm out there. Nobody's around. It's cool. Okay, but I guess that's not, that would be considered overtime, I guess, at this point. But preferably at night or early morning when there's fewer people around. I tell my students, if you're going to start farming, one of the first things you want to do with your farm is keep people from seeing what you're doing. Because you start spraying or something, they call the cops or they call the DOA. I got a farm on the Big Island. I'm spraying, I'm minding my own business, spraying on my farm. Some guy had a, you know, sourpuss look on his face. What's the guy doing? And called the DOA, and I had to do an inspection. So I just tell people, better, if you're going to be using pesticides, you're organic, that's fine. If you're not, you're going to spray. Best that people don't see it. Same thing goes for you guys. If people don't see it, the chances are the complaints will be reduced. Okay, so when you're spraying with a vehicle like this, nozzle types, I'm going to show these, maximum of about a 3-foot wide pattern. If weeds are above the guardrails, I had this question on Kauai. If weeds are above the guardrail, should we spray it first and then mow it, or should we mow it first and then spray it? It seemed like the managers wanted you to mow it and spray it all at the same time. Okay, well, I said that's counterproductive because you're cutting off all the surface area that the plant's going to use to translocate down your systemic. So, and if the cut grass is laying on the stumps, well, I'm wasting the application. So, I guess the idea is they don't want to have, you know, large plants sprayed, turning yellow, turning brown. People are complaining, and then go back and cut. It's still a 2-time thing. So the ideal thing is to cut it, and when it's suckering back, then spray it, and then just keep it down. That's generally what the idea is there. Okay, so that's the story. Now, like I said, the manager guy talked to me. He goes, "I want to get that straight. You know, shouldn't they just spray it right afterwards?" I go, "Well, you can, but it's not the most effective use of the material. You're kind of wasting it." So it's like the crew knew, but then the manager didn't know, so I don't know. I just try to go with what's the most effective way to do it. Cut it first, let it sucker back, and then go spray. I know it's coming back twice, but I mean, that's the most effective way. Okay, now we talked about selective herbicides. What are some of the main groups? Of course, the grasses, okay? Everybody kind of knows what grasses are. Round stems, it has these various structures. Again, it's in your book. Many grasses have a real fibrous root system. Things like Bermuda grass have these underground stems Some just grow in bunches like giddy grass, buffalo grass grow in bunches. Kikuyu grass, torpedo grass, they come in with these big rhizomes. So that's the two different distinctions in grasses, bunch types versus spreaders, okay? Talk about a grass, selective grass control. This is again in my yard. This is zoysia grass, which is part of the lawn grass growing over the mondo. Spray it with Fusilade. I can take out most of the grass. It's still up there by the irrigation risers, but then I've gotten rid of the grass without screwing up the mondo grass, okay? So that's a grass growing in a broadleaf situation. Mondo grass isn't really a grass, it's in the lily family. So you can use something like Fusilade to knock out a grass in something like mondo grass. Some of your other friends you've probably seen out there, guinea grass. I see a lot of this with this mowed area right next to the highway, and then the grass growing like, you know, happily growing in the back. It's got that broom-looking seed head. Fountain grass. Fountain grass is a real bad one on the Big Island. It was brought in as an ornamental. Doesn't look too bad. I mean, it's an ornamental setting here. So it's an ornamental, but the problem is this thing traveled along the highways, okay? When you go along the highways, that's where what little bit of water there is on those lava flats, this thing is growing, okay? So you say, what's the big problem with this? Well, number one, these seeds fly everywhere, okay? And then when it flies up into that Pohakaloa base, it flies into these native forests, starts to grow. This stuff burns. The dryland native forest burns, but then this stuff grows back a lot faster than the native forest, right? So this thing starts to encroach into conservation zones, and it's a fire hazard. And so it's actually on the march, displacing native plants, using the roadways to move around, okay? Fountain grass. Even the goats up at Pohakaloa don't eat it. If you cut it, they'll keep it nubbed away. They'll keep it nubbed down, but they won't go into a state. This stuff is like razor blades almost. It's almost like sandpaper, the leaves. So this one's spreading all over. Again, using the highways to move around. Now, buffalo grass kind of looks like it, but it's actually a pasture grass. They say it's invasive, but it's slowly invasive. It's not as bad as this one, but this is another one that's on all the dry land, a lot of the dry land areas around here. I don't think it's such a bad grass, but it's a weedy species. They say it's invasive. It's not near as bad as this, but it probably has the same sort of fire hazard effect, okay? Sedges. Everybody knows about nut sedge, purple nut sedge. You see the old folks there in the front yard digging out the nut sedge. They're wasting their time. They might come in here and cut. Just don't even tell them. Just say, Uncle, good job, keep going, because they're wasting their time. Why is that? Because about 85% is between 0 and 6 inches, 85%. That means there's 15% below that. So they could be there thinking they're doing a good job, but what they're doing, just like when you cut a branch, you get all the branches sucker back. Same thing with nut sedge. You cut this part off, now all these things that were suppressed by the leaves will start to grow out, okay? Another thing about sedge, Roundup is effective on this plant, but there's a very special way to kill these underground portions. When Roundup first grows, it looks, you know, there's no flower head. You spray Roundup on it, you only burn it back to this, what's called the parent tuber. It's like a non-systemic on nut sedge. Once the flower forms, the metabolism of the plant is sending food down into these new tubers. When the flower forms, then Roundup will kill the whole plant and be translocated into the tubers. So that's a little bit of a, you know, that's more for farmers who have nut sedge like crazy. You got some questions. I got some other ideas on nut sedge too, but nut sedge is a funny thing. When it's freshly growing, Roundup just burns it. Once the flowers form, then it could go systemic and goes through. So that's where the chemical is contact at one phase of life, systemic at another phase. So I tell students, anything that can happen with plants will happen with herbicides. It kill it, it don't kill it. It drifted away, it didn't drift away.
Is a sedgehammer any better for that before it flowers?
I'm not sure. Sedgehammer, he's asking, is Sedgehammer better than that for Roundup? Well, first of all, it's probably a lot more expensive than Roundup. Whether it would translocate into the tubers, I don't know. I don't know. So, okay. Other things, other sedges, they resemble grasses. They call this nut grass, right? But it's really not a grass. It's a sedge. It has a triangular stem, okay? If you cut it in cross-section, the stem is triangular. Leaves come out in threes. There's generally a flower stalk at the end. And it's also associated with wet sites. So, anybody who goes golfing down at the Alawai Golf Course, You see this thing. This is a common sedge of mud flats, okay? And each, what looks to be a leaf is really a stem, modified stem. At the end of each stem is a seed head. So this is something that they're spreading around on the shoes. So this is a sedge. White kalinga is a sedge. Purple nut sedge or nut grass is a sedge. On the Big Island, they have what's called yellow nut sedge, okay? The difference is yellow nut sedge does not have tubers and chains. It just has a tuber at the end. It doesn't have a chain, okay? Pigs love that yellow nut sedge. It's called Cypress esculentus. Esculentus is Latin for delicious. Like I said, I got a farm on the Big Island, and man, the pigs always come back to that same nut sedge patch. Because when you take that yellow nut sedge tuber, it smells kind of nice. Has like a nutty sweetness to it. I was in Africa years ago in the mid-'80s. They were chewing big old nut sedge tubers. If you ever had sugar cane, you know, you get about 2 chews of sugar cane. It's sweet and then it tastes like sawdust. Same thing with those tubers. You get about 2 chews of it. It's got a sweet nuttiness to it, and then you spit out the pulp. But so pigs love that yellow nut sedge. They'll be specifically rooting that stuff up. I don't know how they find it. Sometimes the stuff isn't even growing and they smell it. Anyway, so that's the sedges. The other things, of course, are broadleafs, okay? Broadleafs have leaves with netted veins. Most are considered undesirable and grassy rights away. You see all the lettuce-type plants. You know, they look like lettuce. A lot of vines, brushes, and shrubby trees. Most can be easily controlled in turf with broadleaf herbicides. We have quite a selection of materials. Just to give you some of the more problem ones, creeping indigo, okay? Creeping indigo looks like a pretty, you know, non-threatening broadleaf weed, looks kind of like a clover, has these little seed pods. The only problem is it's poisonous to horses, okay? Horses will be poisoned on that. Khaki weed, it's an amaranth. You've seen those bigger spiny amaranth with the big purple stem? This is like his little brother, okay? This is one that grows in the parks, high compacted areas, has the real pokey flower head. It's kind of pointy. So if you're looking to kill this weed in a turf situation, and it says it kills amaranth species, this is also an amaranth. Plantains, there's broadleaf plantain, buckhorn plantain. There's also some of these there's also native plantains that were used in medicine, okay? Hairy horseweed, this is a big disaster on the Big Island. I don't know how much of a disaster it is here yet, but they call it horseweed because the horse is eating everything but that weed. So if you leave a horse in the pasture too long and this weed is running around, well, you'll have everything but this. And they go, well, that's why they call it horseweed. Anyway, this is that long, straight, single-stemmed broadleaf, has like the little puffball seed heads. This thing has become completely resistant to Roundup in the Puna, Pahoa area. I went to some papaya fields. Man, that stuff is up to the ceiling here. Solid, 6-foot-high stuff, resistant to Roundup. Why? They've been spraying it. Actually, Roundup has this weed on the label. But if you spray it for 10 years straight, seedling population after seedling population, sooner or later, there'll be 1 or 2 plants that are resistant, and then they reproduce, and then you have the whole place covered with this weed that you can't kill with Roundup anymore, where you could at one time. So that's why I don't know if you hear about it, but just like you have to rotate your crops to keep pests from building up, you also have to rotate your pesticides, because if you get close to 100% kill of any pest, guaranteed it'll eventually evolve to be resistant. If it's not completely 100% kill, that means there's always a few alive. It tends to keep a genetic base from building up that tolerance. But something like Roundup that killed all this at one time doesn't kill it at all now. And it's happened across the country. So all this Roundup-ready crops sounds like a good idea short term. Those weeds are adapting to Roundup all across the country. So how much longer Roundup will be a very effective herbicide, it's just a matter of time before things get used to it. Okay, now, herbicides that control specific weeds, I know in your manuals, in those appendix, for the woody plants, there's specific herbicides described for the various woody plants. There's also the commonly used herbicides, and of the commonly used herbicides, I've developed this sheet that we're going to use as calibration for. Non-selective, we talked about the groups, the grasses, sedges, and broadleafs. Non-selective applications, and the typical list everybody should have is there too. So now we're going to talk about actually making the application. This guy's got the the 6 nozzle blast him. He's got a big smile on his face. On Maui, they say this is what they're using. They got the truck, and it's all, you know, they never have to mix the chemical because it's being injected into the flow. But like I said, what happens? How do you calibrate it? The guy says, I don't know. You have to talk to the supervisor. Oh, okay. I would even have a hard time calibrating those injecto jobs. It would take some work, and then how do you know when the thing went bad and the needle valve got clogged? It's great because you're not mixing dilute chemical. You don't have any left over at the end of the day, but you're talking about, you know, injecting into a flow. The truck's got to maintain a certain speed, computers and everything. Very expensive piece of machinery. Works when it's working great, I guess it's good, but when it goes down, then you're back to the old school orchard gun system. So that's why I'm calibrating that today. There's various types of sprayers. You're all familiar with that. There's the walk-behind sprayers that have a pump. There's ATV sprayers. Now, this isn't discussed in your manual, but this is a company in Florida called Alley Cat Weed Wiper. The reason why it's called Alley Cat is because, of course, in Florida, they have a lot of vegetable crops, and the vegetables are grown on, you know, with plastic, just like we have the pineapple plastic. They have the plastic for tomatoes and peppers and other things. And the weeds, of course, are going to grow between the rows. So, you know, it's hard to, you know, labor is expensive, and spraying those weeds out isn't that easy. So they developed these wipers, and basically what it is it's like a mud flap on a truck with this nylon material that's sort of like the consistency of a fire hose. You have a tank of concentrate Roundup, probably 5-10% Roundup. It's being pumped to a little dispersion head on these nylon applicators, and then you just drive around. Of course, if you drove around on turf, you would kill everything off unless you had a selective herbicide, maybe a broadleaf herbicide. But here's an actual application where you guys might want to consider a situation where, you know, it's near a school, it's near a hospital, it's near a residence. You don't want to spray, you just want to wipe it on. These things come in panels so that if you go over a big weed, it kicks out. You may have to go in one direction and come back in the other direction. He's going to be driving over some big stuff. They also have ones just like the mowers that reach out and mow. They also have these wipers that reach out and can wipe. So this might be a consideration in sensitive areas where spraying isn't going to be, if they're out there videotaping you doing this, like, well, what are you going to do? But at least there's not mist flying. They may not know what the hell you're doing with this system like this. Wait a minute now. Now, that's for killing everything. You're dragging it on the ground. There's a selective way to use it, okay? Like I said, the system, when you buy it from the company, comes like this. I brought it here. This is Kaipo Bernie. We're out the Waipio soccer fields where we have this persistent love grass, they call it. I don't know why they call it love grass. Everybody I know hates it. They should call it hate grass. But they call it love grass. So we wanted to use this thing selectively by supporting it just above the turf, but hitting the weeds with about a 10% Roundup solution. The only problem is if you mount that thing directly on a cart, every time you bounce down, that thing is bouncing and you're getting these big streaks on the ground. So those guys made like a sulky. They put on these wheels, they hooked it up to a hitch. Now you can drive hill and dale and just contact the weeds that are above the turf, okay? So if you're in a situation where there's even a coarse turf, you know, Bermuda grass is pretty tolerant to Roundup. A lot of these golf courses are spraying Roundup over the whole place. So even though you're using a concentrated solution of Roundup and you may get some drips and yellow spots, the Bermuda grass will handle. This particular weed, the love grass, is very sensitive to Roundup. So this might be another way where you just don't have the selective herbicides to just physically wipe it with Roundup and using a system like this. Okay, now we're going to talk about determining how much. Now we're going to get into the calibration. So the first thing I want to do is hand out these sheets. Why don't you guys help me out there and give me the leftovers, and then we'll get one going on this side. So Chris Dacus asked me to come up with a handout that would allow the guys to figure out, you know, how much goes into the tank. But I said the only way that works is that if everybody in the state is applying at 100 gallons per acre. You say, okay, well, what the hell's 100 gallons per acre? If I tell you to spray to wet, you know, if we had like some weeds growing here and you say, okay, I'm going to spray it till it's wet, but not to run off, that somehow miraculously works out to about 100 gallons per acre, okay? So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do 100 gallons per acre spray. And we're going to have like a little handout sheet for that too. So I need to have those lights off again. Just I'm going to go through this a little bit, so just hand that stuff out. Okay, so the only way that this sheet works is that if there's a single delivery volume for universal recommendations throughout the whole state. So that's why we're doing this, and I'm trying to get everybody to be spraying at 100 gallons per acre, and we're going to show you that today. Calibration is essential for complaints. You're going to get complaints. You want to be able to prove that you got the right amount going down. Also to get the results described on the label. If you're trying to get selective action and you got to put the chemical out at 1 quart per acre, not 5 quarts per acre, we're going to show you how to do that. Today's exercise, we're going to be spraying 100 gallons per acre. Even though we're going to spray a small area, technically a test area, if we could spray for a whole acre, we could do that with 100 gallons, okay? Nice round number. Now there's a simple math to determine how much of the known volume goes out. So whenever you calibrate a sprayer for an inspector, you're not going to mark out a whole acre and spray it. You're going to mark out a test area. So that test area is going to allow you to simulate what you do all day long, or 2, 3, 4 hours a day. So a test area. So if you're going to set up a test area, and for the exercise or for this chart, you see there's 2 test areas. There's the 150 square feet test area, which is 10 by 15. There's the 1,000 square foot area, which is 10 by 100. So I think it's 44 ounces for the 150, and 294 ounces for the larger areas. So how did we come up with, I got a test area of 150 square feet. How do I know that 94 ounces or 44 ounces is the same as 100 gallons per acre? And now this is the hard part, okay? Everybody has a hard time with math. I do the same thing for my college students. Some of those are totally confused. And I try to make it as simple as possible, but man, there's just something, sometimes it doesn't get through. So if what I say next gives you a little bit of confusion, your ears start to smoke, the blood pressure goes up, just try to stay calm. We'll go outside and show you what it really looks like. And then we'll come back in and show you how the numbers work. But I'm going to go through a little bit of math now, okay? Now, the idea behind this procedure is you don't have to memorize anything. There's no conversion factors. I don't have to keep a little number that I multiply and I do all this business by. This is simply working on logic, okay? Using your brain. Okay, so first of all, we do have some standards, right? Everybody knows what a gallon is. There's 128 ounces to a gallon. There's 4 quarts to a gallon. There's 8 pints, and there's 3.7585 liters, okay? For 1 acre. 1 acre has how many square feet? 43,560 square feet. And a hectare is not a Spanish guy. A hectare is a unit of area, okay? 0.4 hectares is 1 acre. 1 pound is 16 ounces, 454 grams. Now, today's math exercise is going to sound silly at first. That's what I'm good at. And then we're going to use this simple technique to do all the calibration you ever want to do. Whether you're spraying, whether you're putting out fertilizer, no matter what you're doing to a known area, you'll be able to use this formula to figure out how much to use, okay? This is important for contractors trying to figure out, I'm going to put down 100 pounds per acre of nitrogen. I got a half an acre site. How much goes down? Okay, so here's how it works. This calibration technique is called horses and legs, okay? This is called algebra, okay? Some Arab invented this. It's called algebra, okay? Now you got an Italian telling you about what's up. Okay, so how does horses and legs work, okay? It starts off with this mathematical expression. What do we have here? We have what's called a fraction. 2 divided by 8, okay? And 4 divided by x. You have an equal sign in the middle. So this equation is asking a question, the way it's structured. It's asking a question that says, all this is true. I know that 2 horses have 8 legs. You know, unless one leg got chopped off, we're talking about a perfectly normal horse, okay? No three-legged chickens or whatever. This is a regular horse, has 8 legs. Now, somebody gives me 2 more horses. I got 4 horses, okay? Now how many shoes do I need, man? I don't know. I can figure out how many legs are on those 4 horses, even if I don't know anything about horses. If you tell me that, yeah, 2 horses have 8 legs, I got 4 horses, how many legs are I going to get? Okay, everybody knows what that is, but let's go through the technique. The technique is called cross multiplying. You take 2 times x, and what does that equal? 2x. 2x. Sounds kind of complicated already. 4 times 8. 4 times 8. So now I got the same thing. I got the equal sign, and the equal sign says 2x is equal to 32. 4 times 8. But I want to find out what the hell is x. So how do I do that? I divide by 2. I divide by 2, and x is equal to 16. Now, so by this cross multiplication, I know that 4 horses have 16 legs. I can prove to myself that that's absolutely right. How? Because this is called a fraction, and the fraction says 2 divided by 8. We all got calculators. 2 divided by 8 is what? 0.25. Years ago, I was doing a calibration exercise up in Waimea. I swear to God, this guy says, I have a calculator, but I don't know how to use it. That was back in the 80s. You know, the guy was kind of, he had a calculator, but he didn't know how to use it. I can't help you. Okay? You got to be able to use a calculator. So 2 divided by 8 is 0.25. And 4 divided by 16 is 0.25. So now it all works. 0.25 is equal to 0.25. The fraction of 2 divided by 8 is the same as the fraction of 4 divided by 16. If you can do that, if you can set this up and do that math and come up with that x, you can do all the calibration we're going to do. Okay, so now we're going to apply that concept, algebra, solving for x, to spraying pesticides. How are we going to do that? So today, we're going to pretend that we're going to have an inspection by the DOA. Somebody complained, and now we're going to go out and show you how to calibrate. The first thing you need for a calibration is to develop a test area. Okay. One thing you got to have is a tape measure. Okay. You don't want to say, like, I know that those posts on the cyclone fence are 20 feet apart, so 5 of those is 100 feet. You can say that, but don't. And it may be that it's 20 feet apart, but take out a tape measure. Okay. Just take out a tape measure. So today we're going to mark out an area that's 10 by 15 feet. That's 150 square feet. Now I told you that we're going to apply 100 gallons per acre. Okay. So that means 100 gallons over an acre. All right. And now I got to figure out, well, so that I'm spraying a smaller area, instead of saying I got 0.1 gallon or 0.2 gallons, first let me turn that 100 gallons into ounces. Okay. So now I can develop a mathematical equation that asks a question. And this is the horses and legs again. I have 100 gallons times 128 ounces, so I know what my 100 gallons is in ounces. And I'm going to apply that 100 gallons to 1 acre. Now, like I said, you're probably getting the blood pressure going up. We're going to have this little exercise sheet that shows physical reality to the same math. So just relax. So 100 gallons in terms of ounces over 1 acre, right? How many ounces is that on 150 square feet? Okay, it's X ounces over 150 square feet. So now I can determine how many ounces I got to apply to 150 square feet to give me 100 gallons per acre. Because I know 3 things, and I got to find the 4th one. So we're just like the horses and legs, we're going to solve for X. So we cross multiply. And some people say, oh, I don't know whether I should put the ounces or feet on the top. Doesn't matter as long as it's an equal sign. It's ounces over feet, ounces over feet. You could flip it around and have it feet over ounces, but like I said, the equal sign means it's got to be equal. So let's figure this out. X times 43,560 is 43,560x. 150 times the amount of ounces in a gallon, right? Comes out to 1,920,000. To get X, we divide by 43,560. We divide that number by 43,560, and it comes out to 44.077. Okay, so that's why your exercise sheet says for 150 square feet, put down 44 ounces. And we use this mathematical equation to determine that. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I've marked off an area that's 15 feet by 10 feet. I used a tape measure. I put down little stakes so we know what the area is. We're going to spray it with 44 ounces first. I'm going to spray it 44 ounces first. Then we're going to get a volunteer. You're going to spray 44 ounces. Okay. Now I'm going to give you a full bottle of water, which is more than you need, and say, okay, with one pass, I want you to make one pass and repeat that 44 ounces. So that's what you do every day. You have a 200-gallon tank, you have a gun, and once you get the feel of it, what that vibration feels like, what the speed is, what it looks like, you're probably pretty close most of the time. And so that's what we want to do. We want to get pretty close. Within 10% is legal. Okay, so we marked off the test area. We spray the known amount to see what the wetness looks like. What time does it take me to do it? Okay, and so I'm going to use this little backpack system. But the backpack system is designed to simulate what you guys will be doing with a big old sprayer and an orchard gun. Now, this is what you guys are using mostly with the gun when you say a gun? Something like this? Or a wand? Okay, this is an orchard gun, meaning that, man, it's designed to spray trees. You know, the more you pull the trigger, the further it shoots. You pull the trigger a little bit, it shoots a mist. So, T-jet system. So what we have today is a little backpack that's going to simulate a large spray application. So what you do is you set up that test area. You put that known amount of sauce out there until you get good at it. Practice. And if you spray hot asphalt, as it evaporates, you can see if you have hot spots. It should all evaporate uniformly if you put it down uniformly. But you have hot spots. These dry out before the areas. If this was a herbicide application, you probably have good herbicide activity here, almost no activity there, right? So, uniform coverage, especially if you're putting down pre-emergence. Very important to have uniform coverage. Okay, so you have the sheet out there. So the way the sheet is designed is I have the different herbicides. Of course, Spectacle is the wettable powder. That Esplanade is a new one. But the Esplanade has the same amount. Where this was 5 dry ounces, they formulated it to be 5 liquid ounces with that other stuff. Okay? So you have the chemical, active ingredient, the amount per acre, which is on the product label if you read it. Now, it says whether it's pre or post. It says whether you make up 50 gallons, 100 gallons, 200 gallons. These are the amount of fluid ounces or dry ounces to put into that volume of finished spray. And these are the weeds. I just picked out the ones that you're most likely to spray. Morning glories, the plantains, Wadelia, guinea grass, torpedo grass, Napier grass, they call it elephant grass. Bamboo, you can kill Habitat. Habitat is also sold as Polaris, okay? But Habitat is exclusively only aquatic weed control. Polaris is the same chemical, same formulation. The advantage is it has terrestrial uses as well as the aquatic, okay? Polaris, and if you have to kill grassy weeds and you want to spray them once, this is the product to use. Like I said, I got a 6-acre farm on the Big Island. I sprayed Roundup and I'm spraying that, and it always grows back. I sprayed it once with this stuff, killed it. Make. Only problem is, I killed about 4 big coconuts, okay, that were 10, 12 feet high. The coconuts were like from here to the wall. I'm spraying that Napier grass, man, I'm having a good time. Oh yeah, I'm killing it. Yeah, that thing went down, but I didn't spray that coconut tree. It was a big woody tree. The chemical moved through the soil. This stuff, Arsenal, it's called a Mazapir. Arsenal, Habitat, Polaris, I say it's Roundup on steroids. Why? It's foliar absorbed. It's soil absorbed. It can be translated through the roots and come up into a tree. One time I thought I was smart. I was treating nutsedge in my yard with the concentrate. The concentrate went either into the soil or through the roots, came up into the paper bark tree. Then the paper bark tree had quarter-sized pads of buds, compressed buds. It was a crazy distortion. So this is one of those chemicals. It's post-emergence, but man, it has strong soil absorption. It's a once it gets into a plant, they usually don't come back. So this thing can kill trees, grass, paper bark, man. Paper bark's right on it. So this is a non-selective. The only thing it can't kill is legumes. They sprayed this stuff directly over koa trees on the Big Island. That 6,000-foot elevation, that old Hawaiian Homes land that was Parker Ranch had it. It was all kikuyu grass. They're trying to knock back the kikuyu grass so the koa regrows. They sprayed this over the top. Koa's not affected. They sprayed it on gorse. I don't know if you've ever seen gorse. Gorse is this really terrible, thorny legume. I was there. We sprayed it all up and down with this. Nothing. So, some things it's real good on. Leguminous trees, the holly koa, doesn't affect it. Like I said, they sprayed it over the top of large koa trees, did not kill them all. So, A lot of things it'll kill, some things, a few things it won't. And the few things that it won't are leguminous trees. Okay, so that's the structure of the table. Okay? Now, there's one other thing I want to talk about is two more things. Spike. Spike looks like rat doo-doo. Okay, it's these little tiny pellets. It's not designed to be dissolved. It's designed to be with a glove hand thrown into around trees, woody shrubs. This is another crazy killer too. Okay, this thing will kill big trees. And once this thing starts to take them down, there's no coming back on this. The symptoms on this thing, if you put it on like a big tree, you'll get marginal necrosis. Around the edge of the leaf, it'll start to be all crispy and dry. The tree tries to eliminate it through the leaves, that bunch of leaves falls off. Next time the leaves come out, they're a little smaller, they fall off. A little smaller, they fall off. Then when the bark starts to crack, it's history. So if you're in a situation where the hack and squirt don't want to do that, it's hard to get in there with sprayers and stuff, but you can have this in a sack with a glove hand and a mask. You can just throw this. Years ago, they used to advertise this with guys on horseback throwing pellets into mesquite, which we call kiavi, down in Texas. So it's a dry formulation for areas where you don't have the ability or don't want to be carrying backpacks, hauling water. But this thing is also highly root absorbed. So if you got a tree here that you want to kill, they say on the mainland, if you can see the tree, it's too close. That's a little bit of a stretch, but not too much of a stretch. I've used this on the mainland. I don't want to say how, and I don't want to say where. But I did use this to take out a row of trees that were growing on somebody's property. I don't know. They're on somebody's property. And at least 10, 15 feet in on the property, trees died. 10, 15 feet from here to the wall, trees died. Crazy. So it's the kind of thing that you know, it doesn't do too much on grasses. The first thing that comes back are the grasses. So it's generally like a pasture or a non-crop area, but if you wanted to use it, here's how you would use it. First of all, for a 1 diameter circle, a 1 foot diameter circle, it takes, the recommended rate is 20 pounds per acre. Well, nobody's ever going to go out and treat a whole acre with this, I don't think. But you might want to treat individual trees. To treat individual trees takes 0.16 grams. Now, how many of these pellets is 1.6 grams? I don't know. But if you wanted to find out, you would weigh them and say, okay, that's 3, that's 5, that's 2. And so whenever I go out and treat a 1 foot diameter circle, is 3. 2 foot diameter circle, 6. Boom, boom, boom. That's how you would use it. Okay, spike. It's a heavy one. Okay. Now, adjuvants. Adjuvants are things that you add to the spray to do certain things. Sometimes you just want to stick the chemical to a plant. Like when you're trying to control mites in your papaya trees, or you're trying to control a fungus. You want to have a chemical that just sticks it to the plant so it doesn't wet. Other times you want to have a chemical that makes it penetrate more. That's what you use crop oil for, methylated seed oil, so does MSO. Or you have non-ionic surfactants. They're much more expensive. But methylated seed oil, I don't know, 2.5 gallons is like 30, 40 bucks. You can buy a real high, and that's about 1% used. You can buy a real high quality surfactant, 0.1%, it's about 30, 40 bucks for 1 gallon. Okay? So adjuvants are things that you add to the spray to do certain things. Some are going to make it stick and be rain fast. Like I said, you're controlling, if you spray an insecticide that the bug has to eat it, you want it to stick there. That's not necessarily a good herbicide. If you want to penetrate waxy cuticles, you would have a penetrant. So there's these different things that you add. And sometimes something that you add to penetrate, like usually fusilage, you have to use a surfactant, a wetting agent. If you use too high a wetting agent, just the wetting agent itself can maybe damage the plant that you're trying to not kill, just because it's almost like an oil burn. So you gotta make sure you don't use too much. So adjuvants are things that you apply, you add to modify the way that spray is going to work. Now, one last thing about insects. Generally, you're not treating insects all the time, but there might be a new planting and something's hammering it, rose beetles hammering it, and you want to control it. So, just like there's systemic and contact herbicides, there's systemic and contact, herbicides are systemic and contact insecticides. So, malathion would be an example of a contact insecticide. Malathion as a liquid is the one that always clears out the school and the neighborhood gets sick. There's a wettable powder form of malathion. It doesn't stink near as much. I don't even know why they sell the liquid. But you can have systemic ones that you controls through root uptake. Those willy trees along Sam's Club, they use the systemic insecticide to try to kill off that gall wasp. So just like with herbicides, there's contact, meaning you got to spray the bug to kill it. There's also systemics that move throughout the plant, so when the plant sucks on it, it kills them off. Okay, now we're going to go out for the hands-on demonstration. So everybody shake yourselves up, and we're going to roll outside. So 44 ounces applied to 150 square feet is 100 gallons per acre, meaning that when I put this on this test area, if I could continue for a whole acre, it would be 100 gallons on an acre. Okay, so this is just a small test area. This amount on that much surface is 100 gallons per acre. Okay, so I'm going to spray it first, and then I'm going to spray it till she misses, so I know what I'm doing. Then we're going to get a volunteer to spray the exact amount. All right, then I'm going to pop in 101 ounces. This is a full bottle, and then with one pass, somebody's going to try to do the same thing. Then we'll determine what the application was because of how much is left in the bottle. So that's what you would do with an inspector. You make your standard application that you would in the field, and then you're going to have to determine how much volume that is. So if this was and then we'll talk about how you would actually do that with a large system. So what I'm going to do is strap this on. Okay. It's like a modified rig here. This is what I use to spray my little treatments with. So, all right, so watch out, drift. Okay, this is clean water, never been treated with. So I'm going to try to do this all in one pass, okay? So this is what's called a spray to wet application. The reason why I'm stopping here is to get enough pressure with this gun is kind of crazy. Not perfect. Okay, that's 100 gallons per acre. All right. Okay, so now I need a volunteer from the audience. One of you, who's the expert spray guy? 100% spray guy. You guys decide amongst yourselves. Don't everybody jump at once. It's just like school. When I was in 6th grade, I guess I was so rascal. Anytime the other 6th grade had something going on, they'd say, "DeFrank, you go, man. Square dancing, go ahead, man. You go, they need another guy, you go." They're always trying to get rid of me. I don't know why. But anyway, I turned out okay, I think. Okay. Somebody come over. Who's strong, man? You look like the right guy. Come on over here, my man. Okay, put the arm in. Over the top. Okay. Just hooks under there. Okay, so pump this up. Like I said, you might have to stop along the way. Of course, the more you spray, it becomes a stream. So you do the same thing. Pump them up real hard first. That's it, that's it. A little loose. Maybe we can tighten it up. Let me see. Yeah. And then that goes down underneath. There you go. Okay. Okay. So, anything you want to do, just pump it up. Yeah, you gotta, don't squeeze it all the way. It goes into a stream, so that's it. Got to cover the whole area. Better let this car come through here. Uh-oh. That was like 200 gallons per acre. Keep going until it's misting. Uh-oh. All done. Okay, that's not 100 gallon. That's more like a 200 gallons per acre. Okay, well, I want you to try to do the whole thing now. Okay, so that's definitely a violation. That's too much. Because, so what you're gonna have to do is move faster. Move faster. Okay, so let me replace, just sit there, wait. Let's move out of the street. This person can come by here. You can bring them by if they want. Okay, so this is 101 gallons. You can't just put the whole thing down. You can only put down 44. Okay, so what you're gonna have to do now is make it kind of misty and cover the whole thing in one shot. Okay? Okay, so pump it up good and hard first and just get that mist, man. Just try to, just like I did, you know, one shot, do the whole thing, and then stop when you get to the end. Why don't you start on this side so it's easier to see? That's it. Whole thing. Move a little faster. That's it. Keep going, keep going. Keep them coming. Of course, you wouldn't have this problem with a powered sprayer. It's going to be constant, but it's a little more challenging this way. Hot spot. That's it. Keep them coming. Keep going. Boss up. Okay. Almost done. A little bit more. Okay. Okay, hot spot. I know it's hard. Okay. Thank you very much. All right, now, so, as you can see, these single tips are kind of hard to work with, right? But that's what a lot of people got to deal with. Okay, but these can be changed, and I just want to show you that there's other methods to spray. So now I got my fancy dancy nozzle. Okay, this nozzle allows me to select come on, boy. Don't want to cross tread them. Okay. All right, so the part of this exercise is just to show you how important the nozzle tip is. Okay? I got enough water in there. Oh, I can't use this. This is the inspector amount. Okay, we're gonna have to take that deck back to the office to determine what happened. I got flexibility, but sometimes it's hard to control. So that's why they have whole manuals for different types of spray tips. I was going to explain each one of the three types here. Guy was skinny, man. Ooh. Bugger was skinny. Okay, so this particular nozzle body, of course, is a Selecto, right? When you're doing farming or whatever, you may have reasons for different tips. Instead of changing the cap, they come even in like a five nozzle version. The other thing that this thing has is a diaphragm cutoff valve. It's got a little rubber valve here. When the pressure hits it at 10 psi, it'll shut off. At 10 psi, it opens up. Water comes from the outside to the inside. The reason why I have that so it doesn't drip. Okay, so one of the tips that is a relatively new innovation is called an air induction. See these little holes? Air induction means that as it flows through the tip, it draws air, and the droplets come out as as small bubbles. The reason why it comes out as large drops, but a bubble, when it hits the surface, it explodes and makes a fine pattern. Okay. When it comes to pesticides, the better coverage you get, generally the better performance, but it's susceptible to drift. So this first tip is called air induction. It's going to give me big droplets that tend to not have much drift. Okay, you can hear it, you can actually hear it sucking air. Okay, and it has what's called a flat fan. If you guys have ever painted a car, you know that when you have a flat fan like this, you can overlap and get a uniform pattern if you overlap. Okay? These are generally set up on a boom. About every 20 inches, the boom is 22 inches from the ground. So if you have these set up like this, you have a solid application, okay? And large drops tend not to drift. Now, you can get the same sort of pattern with a much finer mist, okay? So it's the same sort of thing. If you had a boom, there's one nozzle, two nozzles, three nozzles, but it's about a 30% overlap, okay? Yeah, see this one, the wind's gonna take it easier. Even though we don't have much wind, it's a finer mist, but you can get closer to the surface to get your overlap, okay? So, one has coarse drops to prevent drift, but it's air induction to make little bubbles. This one is a called a turbo T-jet. It's designed for less clogging because it's going to hit that little plate and make a pattern, okay? And then what you use for spot treatment is just a regular circular spot treatment, okay? So with a spot treatment, there's no way you can overlap that, right? It's always going to be heavy where it's doubling up. If you could do it like this, like what we were trying to do, you could make it pretty accurate. But generally, solid cones are for insecticide spraying where you want like a solid pattern, or spot treating weeds. So you have a very discrete circle. So these are called flat fan nozzle tips. There's all types of variations. There's what's called a T-jet nozzle system. I didn't bring the manuals today. It's one of the things I forgot. But anyway, I just wanted, and you see the thing stops dripping. Without that check valve, the thing would drain out and it would be dripping, which isn't too bad on the highways, but if you're on a golf course or on fine turf, you don't want those drops because they're hot and they're gonna make it yellow. So that's what I wanted to get across, is that there's different nozzle tips are very important for making the kind of spray pattern that you want. It's just that the one that comes with the gun is just a single hole. Now they do make ones with different size of orifice plate. They do make them with bigger holes so you can get like a longer stream, okay? But when you guys are going to do the selective herbicide spray or broadcast across turf, then you're going to need a pattern like this. You can see how this thing is drying out pretty uniformly, right? But you can't do that with a round one. There's no way you can overlap that and make it come uniform because the circles can't overlap. Has to be a tapered flat fan. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go in and the guy who did the spraying, we're going to figure out what was his rate of application to this site. Okay, so we're going to go back in, half hour to lunch. Let's see if we can get this done sooner. Yeah, it's going to be hot sandwiches today. Okay, so remember, this was a full bottle. That would have to take it from my word. That was 101 ounces. So whatever is left that's how much was sprayed out. So we're going to figure out how much was sprayed out by determining how much is left. And then we're going to do our horses and legs business. And now I'm going to give you while I'm figuring this stuff out, I'm going to give you the follow along stuff. Okay, so half goes to this side, half goes to this side. Okay, so I'll let that get passed out. Before I pass out, let me see what's going on here. That's 1,540. Damn, I had a pen. Let me borrow somebody's pen there. Okay. 1,000. There's 1,500. was 1200. 1200. 120 divided by. Okay. Okie dokie. Okay. So you guys all have your sheet of paper. The reason why I gave you this is so you can fill in the numbers and see how the math is going to work for what we actually did. And then I'm going to go try to explain how you would do the same thing with a full-size rig, okay? All right, so reading through here, we have the conversions at the top. Use this sheet to follow the discussion on how much was sprayed to the test area. Question? No sheet. How many? 1, 2. Okay. Okay. Well, these are extras. Okay. All right. So we're going to follow along here. Mathematics made easier. Okay, so the DOT employee wanted to apply 100 gallons per acre because the inspector was here and they're following the sheet, and the sheet says we're putting out 100 gallons per acre. So the DOT employee wanted to put down 100 gallons per acre. Okay, everybody in the state applies herbicide, going to put down 100 gallons per acre, or 44 ounces to 150 square feet. And we showed you with the horses and the legs business, how do we get to 44 ounces on 150 square feet? So like I said, I sprayed 44 ounces. He sprayed 44 ounces and he was too hot. And then we filled the tank up. Now this thing was filled with 101 ounces. So the first thing you got to fill in is how many ounces were remaining. There were 40.5 ounces remaining. Okay, 40.5. So 101 minus 40.5. That means the next thing you're filling in is 60.5 ounces went on that 150 square feet. Now, remember I told you 44 ounces was 100. So we don't have to worry of betting over and under, right? We know he's over. The question is how much over? 10%, 20%? That's where the betting starts. Okay, so, all right, so we know that 60 ounces were applied to 150 square feet. So now we're going to do part one. Determine the gallons per acre of application based on the spray applied to the test area. So you see your first equation is, first thing you want to fill in is 60.5 ounces applied to 150 square feet. And that's equal to, we want to find out how many ounces is that. If he kept applying for a whole acre, how much would he apply to an acre, which is 43,560. Okay, so we do the cross multiplication. 150 times x, okay, equals sign 150x. Okay, and cross multiply is 60.5 times 43,560. Okay? All right, so I said the equation asks a question. If I put 60.5 ounces on 150 square feet, how many ounces is that on an acre? Okay? So now we're trying to relate test area to acre. Okay, so now we want to find out what x is. What is x? Divide by 150, and that gives me x. I divide this bad boy by 150, and what do I get? So I got to do some calculating. 60.5 times 43,560 equals a big number. Divided by 150, 150. Okay, so what I get is x is equal to 17,569.2. Okay? 17,569.2. So you would put that in where it says on part one, x is equal to 17, comma, 569.2. Okay? So now you know that, the next thing is, now you know that 60.5 ounces applied to the test area is the same as 17,569.2 ounces per acre. Okay? So, we know how many ounces per acre, but now we want to know how, and then we could also figure out if this is the right answer. If I substitute X for 17,569.2. So, how do I do that? If I took, so you can always prove that you got the right answer when you come up with this is how many ounces I applied per acre. So if you do the equation, this says 60.5 divided by 150 is equal to 0.4033. Okay? If I take 17,569.2 divided by 43,560, I get the same number, 0.4033. So once I get my number for X, I can prove to myself I got the right answer by substituting the answer into the equation and performing what it says. 60.5 divided by 150, 0.403, 17,569.2 divided by this, same number. So I don't have to even, I know it's not the horses and legs, it's a little bit more complicated, but I proved to myself that I got the right answer. But the question is, this is how many ounces I have. How many gallons is that? Okay, I can use the same horses and legs situation now to figure out how many ounces per acre is that. So, we know that 1 gallon has what? 128 ounces. And that's equal to 17.569.2 ounces is equal to X gallons. Now you could say you could just take 128 and divide it by that, right? Yeah, that's what you do. But if you do this discipline, if you do this horses and legs every time, you have a structure to do the same thing every time. And if you do the same thing every time, you can always come back, substitute for X, and prove that you got the right answer. Okay? So now let's solve this again. 1 times this, 17,569.2 times 1 is equal to 128 times X. Divide by 128, divide by 128, and X is equal to 17,569.2 divided by 128. Uh-oh. 137.25. So X is equal to 137.25. So that was almost a 40% overage, okay? Because he's only supposed to put down 100 gallons per acre. So how do I know that's the right answer? 1 divided by 128. 0.00078 and 137.2 divided by 15,569.2. Yeah, I get 0.0078. I guess I got one too many zeros there. Okay, so let's go back to the sheet. The reason why I want to give you this sheet is so that you can fill it in and then go back and try to understand what's going on. So we said that you know that 60.5 ounces applied to the test area of 150 square feet is the same as 17,569.2 ounces per acre. Now we want to convert that 17,000 acres to gallons. So what you're going to do is put right here at the top, if there's 100, I actually did it inverted, but it's the same deal. If there's 128 ounces in 1 gallon, then 17,569.2 ounces is how many gallons? Okay, 128 times X, you put 17,569.2 there. You got 17.5692 times 1 divided by 128, and that comes out to 137.28. So now, we know that When the employee put 40.5 ounces on 150 square feet, he was actually putting down 137 ounces per acre. So if the inspector said, oh man, that's over 10%, you put down too much chemical based on the label, that's a label violation. Okay, so now, that's how we did it with a little test area in a backpack. How would you do it with a 200-gallon tank, motors running, you got the same gun, the exact same gun with the one nozzle? Here's how I would suggest you do it. First of all, you get your tape measure. You mark off an area that's 10 by 100, first of all. Then with the pump running, you know, that thing has a dial, so you can dial up the spray pattern. What I would do first is get a container, mark it with, what is that, 294 ounces. Have a container, 294 ounces. The pump is running, right? Agitation. I got the right spray pattern. I'm gonna start my timer and time. How long does it take me to cover 294 ounces? Okay? So you say, okay, buddy, measure me out. Ready? Go. Well, okay, it's getting up to the mark, getting up to the mark. When you get to the mark, okay, stop. Let's say that's 35 seconds. Okay? So I know that with the pump running and I got the right spray pattern, I can repeat that spray pattern. Now I know it takes 30 seconds to put out the 294 ounces. Now what you got to do is you got to be able to cover that 1,000 square feet in 30 seconds. Okay? Because now time is volume, right? Like I said, you got the pump running. You got the spray generating the mist that you want. Okay? You collected 294 ounces in a marked container. Okay? And it took you 30 seconds. Now you got to practice. Now you got to say, okay, I got to cover this 100 by 10 foot in 30 seconds. So in your head, the day before the inspection, you're practicing 30 seconds, 30 seconds. Oh, it's only 25 seconds. Okay, try it again. Let me go a little faster. And once you got that pace, when the inspector comes, you say, okay, how do you know that you're putting out 100 gallons per acre? You say, easy. It takes me 30 seconds to collect 294 ounces. Okay, show them. Try to get there. You got your test area marked off. For the same amount of time it took you to collect the proper volume is the same amount of time it took you to cover the space. That's 100 gallons per acre, okay? I don't know how else to try to get you to that 100 gallon per acre point, but if you can do that, and generally, you know, you're going to be a little bit more, you're going to be a little bit less. I had one guy had it absolutely perfect on Kauai, but if you're within 10%, that's within the law. So if you can do that, if you can put out that 100 gallons per acre because you know what it feels like, you kind of know what it looks like, then you can use this chart. And if you use this chart, you will be following the label directions, whether you're making 50 gallons, 100 gallons, or 200 gallons. Now, whether you're using that gun or any other system, that's how you would do it. So you got to convert time to volume, and that time to cover a known test area. Then you're there, okay? That's the best I can do for calibration. I know it's, like I said, that's why I wanted you guys to fill in these things so you would understand how that physical act of treating a test area proves how much you're putting out on a gallon per acre basis, okay? So if you keep this sheet and keep this sheet, you're good to go. Now, the last 15 minutes, we're going to take the quiz. So I'm going to pass out the quiz, and then we're just going to go through it, all right? True, false, true, false. Okay. We're going to get right on the mark here. I'm all calibrated to get this done right before lunch. So that's the basis of calibration. Volume per unit area. If you're not going to treat the whole acre, you have a test area. The test area, you can figure out before you walk out there what the volume's got to be. Okie dokie. All right, all right. 15 minutes to go. Any more? Any more? Yeah, I got some more. Watch it. 1, 2. Okay, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, give that a little eye, put a little eye strain on that bad boy. Okay, let's get started here so we can go eat. I like to eat. Okay, number 1. Not all pesticides are poisonous. Some are not harmful at all. Boss. Herbicides kill weeds, including many ornamental plants and grasses used in the landscape. True. Okay, in a landscaped area, weeds must not exceed more than 10% in any right-of-way area and no more than 2% in urban areas. It's in the book. Pesticides must be followed under penalty of the law. True. That label is a warranty for performance, but it's also restrictive in if you don't do it, you're breaking state and federal law. You got about 10% factor there. The active ingredient of a pesticide is the actual poisonous chemical. The active ingredient. True. It's active. Okay, active ingredient. Okay, now, the label provides information on mixing and use, but does not provide information on safety. False. It has safety on it. Okay. Pre-emergent herbicides, all right? Pre-emergent herbicides are ones we apply to the soil. Pre-emergent herbicides are used to prevent plants growing from seeds. True, that's right. Fusilade DX is an example of a selective post-emergent herbicide that controls grasses like guinea grass, but safe on most broadleaf plants. Is it selective? Is it selective? Fusilade. Remember I showed Fusilade is what you use to treat zoysia over mondo. So that's selective, right? We're selecting, we're not killing everything, we're only selecting the weed. So yes, true, Fusilade is a selective post-emergent herbicide. Okay, Habitat, I talked about Habitat, that's that one that's Roundup on steroids, right? Habitat is a good, non-selective herbicide for weed control in aquatic environments. True. This is powerful. Now, this is regarding systemic herbicides, right? Systemic is the whole system. Complete coverage of the target weed is not as important when using systemic herbicides. Complete coverage is not that important. True, right? Because if you put it on a little bit, it'll go through the whole system, all right? So systemic means, now if it was a contact herbicide, you would have to cover everything you want to cook up, you got to cover. That's why it's contact. Okay? Okay. It is okay to use herbicides over an entire grass-covered area to reduce the amount of mowing. It's okay. Well, it says blackout. Like I said, blackout's okay Friday, Saturday night, but not for the highways. There you go. Okay. This is based on what we just did. The nozzle used for spraying is not very important item to consider. False. It's important because that's the thing that breaks up the spray into the pattern that you want, okay? Okay, sprayer calibration, what we just did, is very important in determining how much pesticide to mix up for a job. True. Who said false? Bailiff whack his pee-pee. Uh-oh, hey. Harassment. Okay. All person doing spraying should have the same calibrated spray volume to use for application. True, if you want to use this, I mean, you can do your thing, but if you want to use this sheet, yes, that's true. Okay. Herbicides applied to the soil will not harm desirable plants in the near vicinity. False. Killed those coconut trees. Bummer. Okay, granular herbicides should be irrigated as soon as possible to activate them. Right? Because herbicides are, granulars are ready to use, but the reason why you got to irrigate it is to move it off that little sand particle into the soil. Okay? This is about insecticides. Many systemic insecticides are effective when applied as a root drench in the root zones of plants. Systemic. What does systemic mean? The whole system. So if I apply it to the roots, will that be effective? If it gets absorbed by the roots, right, it's going to go from the roots to the whole system. So that would be true. Many systemic insecticides are effective. Remember I said about in front of Sam's Club, the Willy Willies, they put a systemic root absorbed herbicide. Well, they're halfway gone. They're halfway gone. They've released a parasite of the gall wasp, so it might make a comeback, but not because of the chemicals, because of the parasite. Okay, you guys all get a B minus. Pass, but you pass. Okay. All right, so that's it for today. Any final questions? What's for lunch? I know that's the big question.
Right outside.
Yeah, right outside. Thank you very much.
Bring it back to your